Good Thursday, everybody. This is meteorologist Don Paul on Don Paul Weather Plus. Yes, I've renamed this baby. My self deprecating humor, Don Paul Blathers, was getting old and really removed any gravitas from those rare moments I have where I make sense. See what I mean about self deprecating? Well, I can tell you that things have improved a little bit for today in the way of any thunderstorm threats. We still could get a rumble here and there in the southern tier, but yesterday, the southern half of western New York was in this dark green area, which is a 5% marginal risk for severe weather. The primary trouble spots today, well to our south and southeast, southwest Texas, a little bit of New Mexico, and also a chunk of New Jersey, Pennsylvania, including Philadelphia, West Virginia. And of note, the tornado risk in that eastern severe weather threat area, which is a 15% threat for overall severe thunderstorms, 5% when it comes to tornado risk is not insignificant. And that 5% risk area includes the Philadelphia metro area and Trenton, New Jersey, and places like that, and Camden. So that's going to bear some watching for those folks later in the day. Currently looking at satellite imagery across the country. We're already seeing a flare up in that southwest Texas area. And around here, we do have holes in the clouds. You probably have seen at least 5 seconds of sunshine, folks, by the time you're viewing this. As far as precipitation coverage goes, a fairly easy day. It does look like there will be a period or two of showers, but the actual coverage will be fairly sparse. The duration will be sparse too. No one was predicting a washout for today, and there will be no washout for today. Now, I do want to take us over to an article which is in the current edition online of the Buffalo News, which I wrote yesterday. And I had a different headline, but the headline the Buffalo News editors have assigned is not bad. Spring weather, disappointing in Western New York, destructive elsewhere. Yes, we all know we have had the vast majority of our spring days turn out to be disappointing. But compared to other parts of the country, we have gotten off easily. We did have some severe weather late Saturday with severe thunderstorms in the southern tier and up in Niagara County. And we've had very little elsewhere in the way of significant flooding. And in general, it's been quiet. Not nice, but quiet. We had 83-degree highs on the 25th and back on May 19th, so there have been a couple of just about hot days and a lot of days in the 70s. For the month, our temperatures are running somewhat about a degree and a half below average for May, though. Now, elsewhere, last May and last year was a very easy year for the country tornadically. But this year, this is data compiled by the Storm Prediction Center. There has been a concentration of tornadoes. These are tornadoes which have occurred through the 28th of this month. And notice how the south central plains and the central plains have been the focal point. When you see a concentration during a whole month in one particular portion of the country, that can be indicative of a persistent pattern where the conditions favorable for tornadic supercells are more persistent in one part of the country. Look how sparse the coverage is elsewhere. We had a tornado warning in Allegheny County the other afternoon. There was no tornado. Very little activity in the east, a little more in Ohio. And this is tied into an upper air pattern, which I'm going to show you. This very nice graphic was designed by my friend, CBS meteorologist Jeff Berardelli. And this is a high amplitude pattern. Usually, by the time we get to late May and June, we don't see these kinds of high amplitude ridges of high pressure, deep, low pressure systems in the upper atmosphere. A hot ridge over the southeast is not that unusual. But this jet stream has helped provide energy for thunderstorms to become severe and tornadic. And one of the main reasons we are seeing this kind of pattern more often in the last couple of decades is due to the warming in the Arctic. I'll explain that in a moment. we are seeing more episodes where these high amplitude patterns are really symptomatic of blocking in the upper atmosphere, less west to east motion for lows like this persistent one than north to south or south to north motion. And the reason that's happening, not the only reason, but one of the two primary reasons, is the meltdown in the ice in the Arctic, which has been occurring since 1979 on satellite imagery, but of course it has occurred at other times in history. And we're going to show you a NASA animation. And take a look at the ice coverage. Satellite imagery of the ice cover began in 1979. This is through last year, and you'll just keep your eye on that and notice the gradual reduction in the coverage as we get closer in time. Less of it, and something happens when the ice disappears. First of all, the ice is highly reflective. It sends most of the sun's heat back up into space. When it disappears, it's replaced by dark ocean waters. And instead of reflecting the sun's heat, those waters absorb it. They become a heat sink. And that allows more evaporation from warmer ocean waters. The freeze season in the winters is shortening, which means you have less ice in September when ice is at its minimum, and then a shorter time for it to freeze up before it begins melting again. So the ice that redevelops is thinner and it melts more readily the following season. So you've got this feedback mechanism going on. And here's the evidence of average September ice cover extent in 1980, up around 8 million square kilometers. And yeah, there are zigs and zags, but the trend is clear, down. Some years are not as bad as others, but it's down. There's absolutely zero argument about this, except from denialists who are not scientists and simply don't have the background to deal with this. The rate of change in Arctic ice cover has been 12.8% per decade since 1979. This is where we were last September. And one of the big deals about that high amplitude pattern I showed you in the blocking, that occurs more often because with a warmer Arctic, and by the way, the last two Arctic winters have just been extraordinary in many parts of the Arctic, all-time record highs that were above freezing temperatures late in the autumn, early in the winter near the North Pole last year, for example. That lessens the temperature contrast between the polar regions and the mid-latitudes. And when there's less temperature contrast, that polar jet stream slows down frequently, and that allows it to buckle back into that high amplitude pattern I showed you. And so you get blocking patterns more often, and they can, on occasion, be a factor in some terrible weather being different than climate. This month, in Oklahoma is weather. Climate is over a much more extended period of time. But also, when Hurricane Harvey moved inland in Texas, it produced the worst flooding on record, the costliest hurricane in American history. Last year, almost as bad with Florence when it moved into the Carolinas and stalled. Both of those storms stalled due to blocking, which I showed you. So that's one of the reasons we are so concerned about the rate of warming, which was predicted in the Arctic. And there's no reason for it to be expected to slow down. It may, in fact, pick up because we're getting more and more absorptive dark waters and less ice. And so, with that in mind, we have at least been away from this part of the jet stream, which has cooked up so much troubling severe weather. Today, as I said, the focal point may be in parts of southeast Pennsylvania and New Jersey. As for our local weather, we're heading for another mediocre but not bad weekend. It looks like on Saturday we'll have some showers for portions of the day, but nothing approaching an all-day rain. I just want to get that across. Sunday, I think shower coverage will be less than Saturday. Just a few showers around. Temperatures a little cooler on Sunday, upper 60s, as seen by the headquarters of the National Weather Service, their forecast center in Maryland. And then Monday will be drying out, excuse me, but it will be pretty cool. Look at that, only around 60 degrees. The average high by Monday would be 71, 72. So we're well off the mark again. And we move ahead to Tuesday, and we're still cool, but not as cool on Tuesday, getting into the mid 60s. And we start to recover on Wednesday with 73, and then a little warmer than that next Thursday. And at least that extreme heat, which is oppressive over the southeast, will be coming back a little closer to average. We're just going to finish off with the overall upper air pattern, though. And I'm going to do this manually so we can see the general trend. This is an ensemble of models at Weather Service headquarters, and this is showing that, remember I said it would be cool early next week. Well, there's that northwest flow aloft with an area of low pressure northwest of Maine, no hot ridge of high pressure over the southeast anymore. And as we go farther out in time, things do flatten out a little bit by the time we get to the anniversary of D-Day next Thursday, but there's still no indication here of real lasting warmth. Tolerable, maybe even a degree or two above average, but that flow at least flattens out. So this looks to be a less potent period for severe weather. And then we're looking ahead to next weekend, and at least here, the ridge is starting to build in the central United States. And there will be nowhere in sight any truly chilly air as we get into next weekend. And beyond that, a little more warmth showing up in this ensemble by the beginning of the next week in June 10th. Things in this kind of pattern, if it verifies, would be warm. We'd actually have, yes, above average temperatures, and yes, they'd last longer than one day. They'd probably last a couple of days. But that's the overall picture. Climate can't be tied to individual tornadoes or tornado outbreaks. The basic consensus now amongst the tornado experts, I just sat through a webinar yesterday by Dr. Harold Brooks. It was put together by Climate Central. Brooks is the senior research scientist at the National Severe Storms Laboratory in Oklahoma. And we continue to see evidence of fewer total tornadoes because there will be less wind shear of the type favorable for tornadoes, but more extreme days. In other words, fewer light days with just a few tornadoes, like today might turn out to be, but more numerous, extreme, really bad days. We're not likely to see an increase in the total number of tornadoes. So that is where we stand. The relationship between tornadoes and a warming climate is still fuzzy. There's something there, but it is not as well known as the relationship between a warming Arctic and the blocking that I was talking about. So even though this is now Don Paul Weather Plus, that's enough blather, don't you agree? So I will be talking with you again here on Don Paul Weather Plus very soon. Please, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button. That is the way this baby will survive. Thanks.